You need to understand that when someone who has been avoidant comes back after months of no contact, it is rarely simple, and it is rarely clean, and it is rarely about closure in the way you might hope. You need to understand that the very act of their return is a mirror reflecting what they once took for granted, what they once had in abundance and failed to recognize. And you need to understand that this reflection is not always meant to be beautiful or flattering. It is often jagged and uncomfortable because it shows them what they lost, what they ignored, what they allowed to slip through their fingers. And you need to understand that absence has a way of sharpening perception, that time has a way of teaching lessons that words alone cannot, and that their mind, which ran from vulnerability, which shied away from intimacy, which sought distance instead of connection, now realizes the magnitude of what they left behind. And this realization can hit them like a sudden weight pressing on their chest, reminding them of the warmth, the consistency, the patience, and the unwavering love they abandoned. And you need to understand that this is not your burden to carry, but it is a revelation that they are forced to face whether they are ready or not, and that their sudden awareness is not a reflection of your worth, but of their own missed opportunity. You need to understand that they may try to mask this awareness with casual messages, with tentative gestures, with a tone of familiarity that seems comforting, but you need to understand that beneath every word lies a mind racing with the knowledge that they were careless, that they underestimated the depth of what you gave, that they assumed your heart would always be available, and you need to understand that this assumption is precisely what absence destroys. Because when someone who once avoided you realizes they cannot replace the love and support you offered, the comfort you brought, the stability you provided, they are confronted with the truth of their own limitations, their own fears, and their own mistakes. And you need to understand that this confrontation is powerful, and it is often painful, and it is a moment that changes them whether they admit it or not. And you need to understand that this is where clarity emerges, because you are no longer in the cycle, no longer at their mercy, no longer waiting for their permission to feel, to breathe, to live fully. And you need to understand that their realization does not erase the time they were absent. It does not rewrite the months of silence. It does not undo the growth you achieved while they were gone. And you need to understand that your heart, now seasoned by distance and wisdom, is a force they cannot manipulate simply by appearing. You need to understand that their return is often accompanied by a mix of confusion and desire, a longing they barely recognize within themselves. And you need to understand that longing is not necessarily love. It is sometimes just a recognition of comfort lost, a desire to reclaim familiarity, a reminder that they once had something they thought they could walk away from without consequence. And you need to understand that seeing you, feeling your presence again, even from afar, triggers memories, triggers emotions, triggers the understanding that what they abandoned was irreplaceable. And you need to understand that this recognition is both their reckoning and their vulnerability. And you need to understand that it is in these moments that you realize your own power, because you are no longer the one waiting, no longer the one chasing, no longer the one bending to fill the void they created. And you need to understand that this power is not cruel. It is not manipulative. It is simply the natural outcome of honoring yourself and respecting your own heart. You need to understand that the beauty of their realization is that it cannot be faked, it cannot be forced, it cannot be rushed, because time has a way of revealing what words cannot. And you need to understand that when absence makes someone see clearly, it is a lesson written in experience, in emotion, in consequence. And you need to understand that this is a deeply human process, one that awakens both them and you. And you need to understand that witnessing it can stir old feelings, can awaken hope, can tempt you to forget the boundaries you worked so hard to build. And you need to understand that this temptation is natural. It is human. It is a reminder of your capacity to feel. And yet you need to understand that feeling is not the same as surrendering, that longing is not the same as compromise, and that seeing someone recognize what they once lost is not an invitation for old patterns to resume. You need to understand that their return is also a reflection of your own consistency, your own integrity, your own ability to love without losing yourself. And you need to understand that the moments you held space for yourself, the months you prioritized your own heart, the times you chose your peace over their presence, are the very reasons they are confronting the gravity of their absence now. And you need to understand that this confrontation is a silent acknowledgement of your strength, a testament to your resilience, a recognition that they underestimated the depth of your boundaries and the courage it takes to uphold them. And you need to understand that even if they never articulate this awareness, even if they never admit it aloud, it is felt, it is known, and it is reshaping the dynamic forever. You need to understand that as they grapple with what they lost, as they feel the ache of your absence, as they wrestle with the realization that your love was not something disposable, you have the opportunity to witness your own growth, to honor your own journey, to embrace the clarity and peace you have built, and you need to understand that this is where true power resides, not in revenge, not in control, not in making them feel the weight of their mistakes, but in standing fully in yourself, fully in your love, fully in your dignity. And you need to understand that the moment they see the consequences of taking you for granted is a moment that belongs to them, but the growth, the healing, the courage you cultivated in their absence belongs entirely to you. And you need to understand that this is the ultimate lesson, that absence teaches them what they lost, but presence teaches you who you truly are. And you need to understand that there is nothing more powerful, nothing more authentic, nothing more beautiful than realizing that your heart, your love, your life cannot be diminished by someone else's avoidance. And you need to understand that when they finally grasp what they once had, it is your consistency, your patience, your unwavering self-respect that echoes louder than any words ever could. And you need to understand that in this truth lies liberation, in this truth lies clarity, and in this truth lies the undeniable proof that you were never the one who lost, and they were never the ones who truly held the advantage. And you need to understand that this realization is the quiet, lasting victory that no absence, no silence, and no avoidance can ever take away from you. You need to understand that when an avoidant returns after months of no contact, it is not always about you and the way you think. And you need to understand that their reappearance often carries with it a storm of unresolved emotions, confusion, and a quiet reckoning that they never invited you to witness. And you need to understand that their mind, which once sought distance and quiet, now churns with questions and what-ifs that they never allowed themselves to ask before. And you need to understand that this inner conflict is real, raw, and sometimes overwhelming for them because they are suddenly confronted with the truth that leaving, avoiding, or shutting down was never a solution. It was a pause, a temporary escape from feelings they couldn't handle. And you need to understand that when they come back, they are meeting not just you, but the version of themselves that they left behind, a reflection that can be both painful and illuminating. And you need to understand that this reflection is a mirror showing them exactly what they risked losing, and often what they are still not ready to fully grasp. You need to understand that when someone returns after months of silence, there is a quiet desperation beneath their words, a nervous energy that they cannot disguise, and you need to understand that this energy is their mind trying to reconcile their actions with their desires, trying to understand why absence created space for longing that presence never did. And you need to understand that longing is a powerful teacher, stronger than any lecture, louder than any advice. And you need to understand that this is why they come back now, why they feel compelled to reach out, why their heart cannot ignore the void they left behind. And you need to understand that the void is not yours, it is theirs, because they are now aware that what they abandoned was something rare, something steady, something they may never find again. And you need to understand that watching them confront this is a profound reminder of your own worth, your own consistency, your own capacity to love, even when it was not reciprocated. You need to understand that this return is not always about rekindling or forgiveness. It is about awareness. And you need to understand that awareness can be messy, unpredictable, and unsettling because they are forced to face feelings they have avoided for so long, feelings that they once dismissed, feelings that they once believed could be ignored without consequence. And you need to understand that consequences have a way of arriving quietly, steadily, without warning. And you need to understand that this is when they realize that love, care, and commitment are not disposable, that trust is not easily regained, that absence may create longing, but presence builds strength. And you need to understand that their realization is not a reflection of your failings. It is a reflection of their inability to hold what you were giving, to value it in the moment, and to honor it fully. And you need to understand that this truth is both liberating and sobering, because it teaches you that the heart can expand, can endure, can survive, and can grow, even when others cannot match its capacity. You need to understand that seeing them come back awakens memories that may have dulled, feelings that may have quieted, and emotions that you thought were settled. And you need to understand that this is natural, human, and expected, because connection leaves traces that time cannot erase. And you need to understand that what you feel in these moments is not weakness. It is proof of your depth, your sensitivity, your ability to love fully, and you need to understand that this sensitivity is your strength, not your flaw. And you need to understand that it is precisely this strength that forces them to confront the choices they made, the walls they built, the distance they created, and you need to understand that walls, no matter how high, eventually reflect the cracks in their own resolve, the hesitation in their own heart, and the recognition that what they lost was not empty, but meaningful, vibrant, and life-giving. You need to understand that the reasons they return are not always articulated, often hidden beneath awkward words, hesitations, or casual attempts at connection. And you need to understand that this is because facing vulnerability is terrifying for someone who has long avoided it, because admitting longing is a surrender, admitting fear is a weakness, admitting regret is exposing oneself to shame, and you need to understand that every hesitant text, every cautious approach, every fleeting message carries the weight of an internal struggle that they have carried alone for months. And you need to understand that their struggle is not your responsibility, it is theirs, and yet it is your awareness, your patience, and your strength that makes their return possible, because they recognize the reliability of your heart even when they were absent. And you need to understand that this recognition is not about giving them power. It is about understanding the consequences of absence and the gravity of genuine connection. And you need to understand that witnessing this without surrendering yourself is one of the most powerful acts of self-respect and emotional maturity you can demonstrate. You need to understand that when they finally meet your gaze again, when your presence reminds them of what they abandoned, when the silence they imposed is broken, they feel a clarity that is impossible to fake. And you need to understand that this clarity is sometimes overwhelming for them because they are forced to acknowledge the depth of your heart, the patience you maintained, the dignity you protected, and the life you built without them. And you need to understand that this realization, however uncomfortable for them, is a tribute to your resilience, your growth, and the unwavering truth that you cannot be replaced or diminished by anyone's avoidance. And you need to understand that the very act of their coming back, no matter the reason, is a reflection of what you allowed yourself to hold on to, what boundaries you honored, and what love you carried with grace. And you need to understand that this is ultimately a lesson for both of you, one that teaches them the weight of their choices and teaches you the value of standing fully in yourself. And you need to understand that their return, while significant, does not dictate your path. It illuminates it, it challenges it, it confirms it, and you need to understand that in this truth, there is immense freedom, immense clarity, and immense power. You need to understand that absence awakens them, but presence transforms you, that longing teaches them, but boundaries define you, and you need to understand that their return is a moment for reflection, not surrender, a moment to witness, not to yield, a moment to honor your own heart while observing the awakening of theirs. And you need to understand that in holding your ground, in respecting yourself, in acknowledging their return without being consumed by it, you create a narrative of strength, dignity, and profound emotional wisdom that they cannot erase. And you need to understand that this is where the true lesson lies, where the ultimate power resides, where the quiet triumph of self-respect is revealed. And you need to understand that their return, while emotionally charged, is ultimately a gift of clarity for you, a mirror reflecting not what they lost, but what you earned, what you built, and what you became while they were absent. You need to understand that when an avoidant finally decides to come back after months of no contact, it is not a casual decision, it is not a fleeting thought, and you need to understand that what you are witnessing is the culmination of long nights of reflection, silent reckonings, and a confrontation with feelings they never allowed themselves to face before. And you need to understand that this return is never simple, because avoidance is not just a habit, it is a shield, a way to survive, a way to protect themselves from vulnerability that they could not handle in real time. And you need to understand that beneath their words, beneath the hesitation, beneath the cautious steps forward, There is a torrent of unspoken emotions, regret that they could not voice, longing that they could not express, and realizations that are painfully new to them, because absence has a way of teaching lessons more harshly than presence ever could, and you need to understand that these lessons do not come gently. They do not come without reflection. They do not come without the weight of the time that was lost. And you need to understand that this is why they come back now, why their heart cannot ignore what it tried to escape, why the pull of connection becomes undeniable, why the echoes of what they abandoned call louder than any distraction, and you need to understand that this is not about manipulation. It is not about tactics. It is about the awakening of their own conscience, the confrontation with the reality that they left something rare, something steady, something irreplaceable. You need to understand that when someone returns after months of silence, the reasons are always layered, complicated, and deeply human, and you need to understand that one layer is the recognition of what you offered that no one else can, and you need to understand that they are suddenly confronted with the truth that your heart, your presence, your patience, your unwavering ability to love without being diminished is something they cannot recreate or replace. And you need to understand that this realization, while powerful, is often accompanied by fear, by hesitation, by the same instinct that caused them to leave in the first place. And you need to understand that fear is not weakness. It is human. It is their way of grappling with feelings that they were too young, too scared, or too unready to hold. And you need to understand that when they step back into your life, their heart is both awakened and cautious because they know the weight of what they risked, and they are beginning to understand the consequences of the distance they imposed. And you need to understand that consequences are teachers that cannot be ignored, lessons that cannot be escaped. And this is why their return feels heavy, hesitant, and profoundly real. You need to understand that when they approach you now, they are not the same person who left, and you need to understand that time has changed them, forced them to confront the emptiness of avoidance, and shown them the beauty of the connection they abandoned. And you need to understand that in their eyes, in their words, in their small gestures, you can see the silent acknowledgement of what they lost. And you need to understand that this acknowledgement is not always spoken clearly. It is not always articulated fully, because vulnerability for them is still a challenge. But you need to understand that it exists, it is present, it is undeniable. And you need to understand that noticing it, witnessing it, recognizing it is a form of emotional power that is yours to hold, because you have been present, consistent, and authentic through all of their absence. And you need to understand that this is the difference between them awakening and you thriving, the difference between regret and growth, the difference between longing and strength. You need to understand that the moment they reach out, it is both a test and a truth, a reflection of their inner world and their unresolved emotions, and you need to understand that they are meeting themselves through you, seeing their mistakes, seeing the void they created, seeing the life they temporarily left behind. And you need to understand that this confrontation is uncomfortable for them, but it is necessary because growth cannot occur without awareness. And you need to understand that their return is not about reclaiming control. It is about facing the consequences of distance. And you need to understand that these consequences are heavy with emotion, heavy with memory, heavy with the realization that time is finite and hearts are fragile. And you need to understand that your own heart, which held steady, which continued to live, which refused to be diminished, is a beacon of clarity and truth in the storm of their awakening. You need to understand that when you see them struggle to express themselves, when you feel the hesitation in their voice, when you notice the careful words and pauses, it is not disinterest, it is not indifference, it is the weight of confronting feelings they once buried, and you need to understand that this struggle is real, it is human, and it is a reflection of the courage it takes to return after being absent. And you need to understand that the courage is not theirs alone. It is yours too, because you are the one who holds the boundary, the one who honors yourself, the one who refuses to bend to fear or manipulation, the one who embodies the strength of someone who is whole, even when someone else was not ready to be. And you need to understand that their awakening, while emotional, while intense, while stirring, is ultimately a mirror reflecting your power, your patience, your emotional maturity, and your capacity to love without losing yourself. and you need to understand that in this mirror, you see not only what they are realizing, but what you always knew, what you always embodied, what you always held in quiet confidence. And you need to understand that this truth cannot be diminished by anyone else's absence, avoidance, or return. You need to understand that their return is a reminder that hearts matter, that presence matters, that consistency matters, and you need to understand that your life continued, your spirit endured, your heart healed, and you need to understand that this is the ultimate lesson for both of you, that absence teaches, presence strengthens, and boundaries empower. And you need to understand that by standing firm, by honoring yourself, by observing their return without losing your grounding, you demonstrate a truth that no avoidance, no silence, no fear can erase. And you need to understand that this truth is not just for them to see. It is for you to feel, to own, to embody, and to carry forward as proof that your heart, your dignity, and your self-worth are never contingent upon someone else's readiness. And you need to understand that their return, while emotional, while stirring, is ultimately a reflection of the strength you always held, the love you always offered, and the power of someone who knows their value and refuses to settle for anything less.